Agustin Canapino spun off turns 10 and 11. This is the quick left right after the backstretch, and the car stalled and could not continue. However, race control displayed the caution after Felix Rosenqvist completed his stop. This allowed Rosenqvist to get an advantage of not losing many positions and getting in between Scott Dixon and Alex below. Several drivers were not happy at all with the call and felt like an unfair advantage was given. We know IndyCar has done this multiple times before, trying not to have the caution ruin a team's race. But some drivers have actually said that when they do this, it actually does ruin a team's race. So it has the opposite effect of what IndyCar intends. And we know as soon as the caution comes out, the pits close until the fill is packed up. So Rosenqvist would have gone from a podium finish to deep in the pack. Starting with you on this one, Ben, does IndyCar need to change its policy of holding the caution to allow others to pit? And should this be resolved before next season?
Yes. And Kobe, what did you just say? What are these things called here, these yellow flags? They're called cautions. Either something is a caution or it's not. You can't just say, oh, well, obviously this is a safety hazard, but let's trust our drivers to get through the next lap or lap and a half cleanly so we can get through the pit cycle and not disadvantage everybody, and we'll trust that they can do that, and then we'll throw a caution after. You can't do that. This, to me, is worse than how the end of the Indianapolis 500 was handled, and anybody that watched that wrap-up show knows how I feel about the multiple red flags to try to guarantee a green flag finish there. Alex, I'm sorry. I know you're a big Joseph Newgarden fan. Credit to your guy. He totally deserved the win. I'm not taking anything away from him. It's how race control handled the finish of that race that I have a problem with. But this is an even bigger problem for me. Either something is a safety hazard that warrants the yellow flag to come out, or it doesn't. That's part of why I'm so opposed to the stage cautions in NASCAR as well, because it's right there in the name. You throw the yellow flag out when a caution is necessary, when it's necessary to slow everybody down because there's a hazard on the track, and that was clearly the case here. But race controls, they've done so many times before, decided, well, let's make sure Felix can get into the pits first, and then we'll throw the caution out, and everybody will be happy afterwards. Even though Scott Dixon clearly wasn't happy, he was furious, and good for him. He should have been furious, because even though they try to neutralize it, they try to make sure nobody gets advantage or disadvantage, it's inevitable that either whatever you do, it's going to happen when a caution comes out on the track, whether you hold it for a lap or not. That's just how racing goes sometimes. So you might as well just throw the caution when it's absolutely necessary at the very beginning, rather than holding it back to try to make sure everybody can get through the pit cycle. But you still have drivers that are going to benefit from it or not benefit from it either way. So this is absolutely something that needs to be looked at going into 2024 and beyond, because, again, it's there in the name. A caution is necessary or it's not. There's no gray area there. It was clear the 78 was stalled, was not going to get restarted. You've got to throw the caution immediately because that's a safety hazard, and it's irresponsible to hold it for a lap just so we can get through the pit cycle. It's absolutely ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I know a lot of drivers were really upset about how that was handled, and the big thing during that race, we were feeling little bits of rain, little sprinkles here and there, not enough to switch over to the wet tires, not enough of concern. But just in the event, if something happened and we saw a driver lose control and slide into Canapino, we would have a bigger, worse accident, and we'll be all critical of race control not throwing the caution soon enough. This opens a can of worms for IndyCar, because I get it. They don't want to see a team up front have the race absolutely ruined. But you just essentially ruined what could have been a duel between Scott Dixon and Alex Palou. At the end of the race, we saw Agustin Canapino. He finished behind Will Power. What if that caution was thrown faster? Would he still finish ahead of Will Power? Would he not finish ahead of Will Power? Just waiting essentially ruined his race. At the end, I don't understand this philosophy of we don't want to ruin the leaders or the front runners' race because of a caution. If this was under wet conditions and Canapino spun, caution immediately because we know it's wet conditions. Dry conditions, okay, we're going to wait till Felix Rosenqvist and some others make their pit stops. I just don't agree with that philosophy at all. This is part of racing. This is why they call it the danger zone in NBC. If you're out there too long and the caution comes out, your race is ruined. That's part of racing. I just don't understand this philosophy. Scott Dixon mentioned it in the press conference, and he wasn't happy about it at all.
Well, Scott Dixon shouldn't be happy about it because he lost a position to Felix Rosenqvist, who essentially got a free pit stop and didn't know any sort of strategy or anything. He was just he just pit when this car was sitting there, and then he got to go for a free pit stop and then got second place for free. and it's ridiculous. The question is, should this be resolved before next season? This should have been resolved several seasons ago. This was a problem last year and the year before, and this is still just an weird, unwritten rule that IndyCar has, and I don't get it because you're hurting your own product, you're manipulating your own race, and you're putting your drivers at risk. I don't get it. It makes no sense, and for me, this really killed the race for me because this race for me wasn't exactly enjoyable in the first place. The strategy wasn't really doing it for me. But then when this happened and other stuff we're gonna talk about later just came up, it's like you're ruining the fan experience. You're ruining the experience for the drivers. I don't. It's ridiculous and need to be changed a long time ago.
I agree with you. And one of the things we seem to hear this quite a bit from the race car drivers, IndyCar doing IndyCar things. That was something we've heard Rossi said in the past. Scott Dixon said that. Why is race control still, oh, we want to ensure we don't ruin somebody's race? Well, let's just let the caution wait until hopefully everyone makes their pit stops. It just doesn't make sense. And like you said, it ruins the experience for the drivers, the fans. I just don't understand this philosophy.
And Joe, if I can just follow up with one more thing here. They didn't even try to hide it. As soon as Felix got to the pit exit, that was the exact moment that the caution lights came on. And you want to talk about getting through the pit cycle, he didn't have to do an outlap. You got the exact moment he left the pits, that was when the caution lights came on. So it doesn't, you want to say you get through the pit cycle and make sure everything's neutral there. I just, it's an advantage for him, and it's clearly a disadvantage for Scott Dixon, and that's why he was so upset. So you didn't even get through the entire cycle because in laps and out laps exist, and he got the benefit of not having to do an outlap on cold tires.
Yeah, for sure. I'm in full agreement with all of you guys. It doesn't make sense why IndyCar continues to do this, as I already said. While their intention is not to ruin anyone's race, they still end up ruining drivers' races by doing this. Like you were saying, Ben, it's a caution or it's not. And I don't understand how they always say, be like, oh, the car is in an unsafe position. We really need to hold the caution until everyone's pit so we don't ruin the race. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think that this is something that needs to be resolved before the 2024 season. Like you're saying, Joe, is racing. These things happen. If there's a crash, someone stalled on track and you haven't pitted yet, unfortunately, that's a circumstance and you just have to deal with it. So if you haven't pitted yet, that sucks for you, but you're gonna have to come and pit under caution, and then you have to fall to the back of the pack. And we talked about several drivers who are unhappy with the call. Do you guys see Pato Award's interview after the race? Pato was absolutely fired up. Not just about this, but other things as well. I also wanted to bring up the point. Pato was very frustrated with the lap cars because unlike Formula One, they don't have the blue flags. In IndyCar, where make the lap car pull away, and then you also have certain times on the restart, you have lap cars starting up there in between the leaders, which is also frustrating for them. So I'm wondering, how do you guys feel about Pato's rant about the lap cars? Do you think IndyCar needs to introduce a blue flag system so the lappers will have to get out of the way? And on the restarts, do you think it would be best to move them to the back of the pack so they're not interfering with the leaders?
On the restarts, for sure, move them towards the back of the pack. I would say this: it's one thing to try to get a lap back if you find yourself on the tail end of a lead lap or just behind the leader and you have a faster car than the leader. I'm all for allowing yourself to try to unlap yourself and get back on the lead lap, and then hopefully you catch a caution at the right time and can catch back up to the pack from there, and then you're back in the race. But if you're the fifth car one lap down, you're in the middle of a battle for seventh place or whatever, you have no business up there, to be quite honest. You've got to get to the back of the pack and just let the lead lap cars race for themselves and not influence that battle in any way that you don't need to be influencing it. So I don't know if they need a blue flag system in the exact same way that Formula One has one, but something's got to change because, I think Pato O'Ward in particular certainly was not wrong with his rant there at the end of his post-race interview this weekend here. It certainly is an issue that needs to be looked at going forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then with the lap cars, that's another issue, is the rules that IndyCar has are awful as well. There's just so many rules in IndyCar that are just like, they're not, it's just weird and wrong. I don't like them. And another thing I wanted to ask you guys was about the yellow flags during like a pit cycle. Would you guys prefer they follow F1's idea of they keep the pit open when a yellow comes out so they can still come and pit, or would you rather have what NASCAR does, where it's like they do throw a yellow right away, maybe sometimes a little too soon, but they still have the pit cycle happen. They don't care if it's in the middle of the cycle. Like, which would you prefer in that case?
I would say because kart used to do the same thing where it was similar to F1. Here comes the caution. If you could get into the pit road, you right away did that because that advantage of you didn't have to worry about losing so many pits. Of course, the big thing, and I think it's funny, we're talking about caution when it's thrown. We know Kevin Harvick's race was thrown out because of the caution coming out. Can you imagine if race control, oh, we're just going to wait so we don't ruin Kevin Harvick's race? Oh, we'll be talking about that for a long time to come. But I think that IndyCar does need to look at how we do this because you can't just be inconsistent with the cautions. We can't talk about, oh, we're going to ruin the race, and then the lap cars. I know that's been something where in the oil is becoming an issue, here is becoming an issue. Do we really need to have the lap cars in between positions of cars that are not a lap down on the lead lap? Why can't we readjust them where they go towards the back? Don't bring up the idea of double file restarts. We don't want IndyCar to be looking at that, but I think we got to make some improvements because at the end of the day, while I think we all agree what we like about IndyCar, it is a pure race. You watch the Indy 500, you could go caution free potentially. There's no stage cautions. We don't have exactly rules to equalize the field as much as other series. But when you have situations like this where race control displays a caution, they're just allowing lap cars to get in the way, essentially spoiling the race for others. Is that really good for the fan experience? Is that good for the drivers? Is that good for sponsorship and TV ratings? I think those are factors IndyCar needs to start looking at and considering.
I just think we need to get away from the mindset that we can somehow avoid having somebody's race advantage or disadvantage the moment a caution or a safety car comes out. It's inevitable. Whatever you do, because Alex, like you mentioned, Formula One has very different rules for when the pits are open under the safety car or the caution period. How many times have we talked about a driver winning an F1 race or scoring points or getting a podium or whatever, or losing the opportunity to win a race because of an ill-timed safety car or a well-timed safety car? Whatever you do, whatever your rules are, it's always going to positively impact somebody and negatively impact somebody else. I don't think there's really a good way around it. Joe, like you mentioned, I know Kevin Harvick would certainly be asking for a rule change based on what happened last night of a NASCAR race, but it's so hard to find a way to neutralize everything and make sure nobody comes out on top or behind based on what happens or when a caution period falls, when a safety car period falls. So I think it's a very tough situation for a sanctioning body to be in. So we might as well just not do what IndyCar did yesterday, and either it's a caution or it's not. It comes out the moment it has to for safety reasons.